Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny Biggs. I am the Communications Director of Raise Your Hand, and I would like to welcome you here tonight to our Special Education Forum. We have a great panel assembled, and I think we are going to learn a lot and have some great discussions. I also want to let you know that I am doing Facebook Live. That's just because we've had this expressed to us a lot that we should be broadcasting our forums for people that can't make it here. So we are doing that. My phone, it's very low tech. Luckily, I have a 12-year-old that can figure all this out for me and has been teaching me all sorts of things. And he has a whole hack system going on this tripod for us. But it'll be directed at the panel mostly, but if there are questions, it will come your way. Mostly to just capture that, the audio. So if you see it coming your way and you want to dunk or something because you don't want to be on Facebook, you won't be offended. Also, after it's on Facebook Live, I do upload it to our YouTube channel so that we have it for sharing purposes and so that people can watch it afterwards who weren't able to make it here tonight. So thank you so much for coming, and I'm going to hand it over to Josh.
Oh,
and I'm not going to trip.
Did I get you? Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Hi everybody, my name is Josh Rudinsky. I'm a CPS parent and a CPS graduate, and I've had kids in CPS for the last 19 years. I've had a child in special ed in CPS for the last 16 years. And so I'm just here to facilitate the panel as a concerned special ed parent. And we have a great group here tonight, and I think a lot of us are just very confused about what's happening in special ed this year, what's been happening over the last 5 or 6 years, but this year in particular. And we're going to try to get into some of that, get some good information from different perspectives, and then hear from all of you if there are parents here who want to share their stories, who want to engage in discussion. But we have a short time together, so we're not going to probably be able to get through every detail of every person's case. What we want to do is find out really what's going on in special ed and what our different panelists can share with us. So I'm going to start out with some questions for our panelists. Raise Your Hand has done a survey of parents in the district to find out what's going on in the schools right now. We're going to share the results of that survey. And then take Q&A from you guys, have a discussion back and forth with the panel, and find out what action steps at the end we're going to try to get organized, because if we don't get organized, this stuff is just going to keep getting worse. So really we're here to find out how can we work together, how can we be organized, and that's where we'll wrap up tonight. So let me introduce, I'm going to start by introducing the panel. We have Christine Palmieri right over here. She's a mom at Blaine, a good warrior, special ed mom trying to make things happen for her kid like the rest of us. So Christine. And we have Ashley Fredhold from Legal Assistance Foundation. LAF is a wonderful place. It helps people with legal issues of all kinds. But Ashley is the one that they send the education problems to. So she has represented, she's one of the small group of people that do that. So she'll be here from a legal perspective, talking about what's the law, what can we do legally in these situations. I've got Rod Esfond over here from Access Living. Rod is a longtime warrior for people with disabilities in Chicago. And Rod probably knows more history behind this stuff than all the rest of us in this room put together. He can give us some perspective on how we're advocating for people with disabilities and what is different this year. And we have Natasha Carlson, who's at Camas Elementary, special ed teacher, and also doing a lot of case managing duties and paperwork and all kinds of other stuff that doesn't have to do with being in the classroom with our kids, because that's how things are right now. But Natasha also is very active in supporting parents and being out at meetings like this. And Megan Kowalski, another warrior special ed teacher here with us from Walsh Elementary. And so our two special ed teachers are here to kind of give us that perspective of the teachers, what they're facing, and what's going on in the schools from their perspective. Again, if parents and teachers all get together, I think we're in a much better situation to try to fight some of these issues. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a wonderful education reporter from WBEZ in the room with us. Where's Sarah Karp? I know I saw her here earlier. Hi, Sarah. Yeah, let's hear it. Sarah has just been doing what journalists are supposed to do. She's exposing what's going on in the district. She had a wonderful 3-part piece on WBEZ a couple weeks ago. That was such hard-hitting reporting that CPS had to come out and try to squash it, which doesn't always happen. And so what I'm hoping is before we get started, just because this is such an unusual moment, Sarah, where reporters don't always get to make a big splash like that. Would you mind coming up and just sharing with us for five minutes or so, like what do you see going on? What do you think is important about this moment in special ed and CPS? You know what? Can we grab a chair so Sarah can sit? Grab a chair right here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that the story that really just came out of going to board meetings for the last year and 2 years and seeing so many parents come and complain and talking to so many parents and just realizing that there was, and teachers, and realizing that there was a shift going on and not really understanding what happened and trying to understand what happened. And then somebody told me just in passing, somebody in the CPS administration who works actually in the finance department said something like, well, one of Claypool's consultants has an office in the special education department. And I was like, really? That's weird, And an auditor. This was a person from the finance department. She said, well, an auditor. She was actually trying to convince me to do a different story, but she had mentioned this. And so then I FOIA'd. I was just curious as to just wondering what was going on. And I was really surprised when I FOIA'd all this information about the auditors, about Claypool's consultants, which actually when the consultant contract was originally passed, I tacked it up on my billboard because I was like, this is a lot of money that we're paying for consultants. It was a budget that went from for professional services went from 1.1 million to 4 million to 14 million to 25 million. Now it's up to 28 million. And so I was just like, there's a lot of money going on here. What's going on? And, and sort of shocking to me, I got all these invoices from these consultants, and one of them, a lot of them mentioned special education, a lot. And, come to, sort of put the pieces together where they talk about developing protocols, and, there's a software consultant in there who's developing the software for, to implement the protocols. One of the things that is so interesting, and I don't want to get into a back and forth at all with Chicago Public Schools at this point, but one of the big things contentious points was about, did they cut the budget? Because I was at a lot of the budget hearings last year where Claypool really insisted that they did not cut the budget for special education. And, so I went back and forth with them a lot. And, what I think is clear is that, and I don't think this is refutable, that they did cut the budget. They tried to cut it $30 million. They wound up spending a little more, but some of that they spent more is because they had to pay the teacher raises that was in the CTU contract. So in many other departments for just regular teachers, the budget went up over what was last year, but for special education teachers, it went up to less than it was the year before, but more than they expected to spend. So it's sort of complicated, but I just think the basic facts that they said they weren't going to spend less, but yet they planned to spend yet less, and they did spend less. Mm-hmm. And that they implemented protocols, guidelines, whatever you want to call them, and that these were done by auditors whose main job as an auditor is not to make sure that students get, maybe not to make sure that students get better services, but they're at least charged with saving money. And in fact, Frank Clark said at one of the board meetings when these auditors were questioned by the Sun-Times that did an article just about how much money we're spending on consultants, he said, well, they've saved us a lot of money. But later, now, CPS saying, well, that's not why they were there. They're there to better the education of students. So, there's a little bit of a disagreement there, but I do think that what, at the top, that it's really people out, CPS can say whatever they want about me, about my reporting, but it's the people that are truly living the experience that can, say if this was real.
That's right.
Or not. And it's not just that, I've had a dozen principals call me saying this is what happened. Now, they won't go on the record because, as you know, CPS will fire a principal for talking out. But if it wasn't, you can't deny what's actually happened. You can only deny. You can say all you want from wherever you want, but you can't deny your guys' experiences. So that's about all. And also, my phone number, if you have something that you need to talk about, is 312-948.
Oh, it'll be on there.
Yeah, it'll be 948-4625, and I'm pretty accessible. Wendy and everybody should know my phone number. So just call me because I'm always interested in hearing what's going on in CPS.
Is there any particular angle you're looking for right now?
I'm just open to stories. I mean, at this point, I think I'm just trying to just keep following up, see what's happening now. Just keep understanding what's going on. So yeah, and if it, especially particular problems that are really, where we can document the egregiousness. Because one thing I'll tell you, one of my biggest disappointments is that quietly CPS went after the parents who talked to me, and they've never done that before in a story. So they've tried to discredit reporters before, but they have not necessarily tried to discredit parents before. That we're talking about the needs of their own children, and I mean that broke my heart because that I think as a journalist you want to do no harm, and I certainly did not expect that. But I do feel very now conscious of trying to protect the people who talk to me, because that's the last thing I want is for there to be any harm.
In what way did they go after you?
Well, when I originally tried to ask them about this parent prior to the story come out, they said, well, we can't talk about it because of federal privacy laws. But afterwards, in a letter that they only sent to me, they tried to discredit her story. Even though, before, it's FERPA. So, I mean, that's it's again. I mean, really, they broke the. If they would have broken the law by talking to me before, they broke the law by putting a sentence. I mean, they just put a sentence or two, but and then they told the principal of that school. I think he got some heat, and so that's just they do not tolerate people speaking out. I don't know what kind of democracy we live in, but that's
I'll just say as a parent, we appreciate truth-telling because when we go up against it and they say no, and then if a principal approves the services, they get in trouble. So it's hard to get the story out. So what you did with those 3 stories got the story out. Now at least they're having to defend themselves on it, and it's much appreciated from a parent's perspective. I'll say
It makes
that.
it easier for the parents too, when they know that there's. I mean, CPS tried to discredit my story to me. I was like, I know.
You don't know what you're talking about. You're just the mom.
Yeah, but it makes it a lot easier when you know that there are other people experiencing the same thing and that it's being expressed and it continues to be. So that's really great.
Hopefully you'll stick around and be part of the conversation tonight. That'd
I'll
be
be
great.
back here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask some questions to the panel here. These are just questions that have come up from parents through raise your hand to just people who are trying to figure things out. And I'll direct each question at one of the members of the panel, but if anybody else wants to chime in, please do. So Rod, I'm going to start with you. Can you just talk about how these latest developments, what Sarah was talking about, the stuff that's new this year, what are you seeing in the work that you do to advocate for people with special needs? What's your perspective on what's happening? It seems like we're here every year, but like compared to last year, what do you see is happening this year?
So, as we know, Chicago Public Schools went to a cash balance of 0 in fiscal year 17, which was last school year, at least 3 times. That means 0 money, no money in the bank. They were living on totally borrowed money, and they had to carry out extreme measures even with the borrowed money. They have a line of credit from banks. None of that's free. So what we're experiencing this year is left over from this endless fiscal crisis. The crisis is blamed on many areas, income taxes, Governor Rauner, many things. But this budget, this district has no reserves. It has no plan to have any reserves. And every family in here knows you need to have a little money in the bank besides your credit card, or you're in big trouble. And this district's in big trouble. And the big apple is special ed per head, per child. It's more expensive than anything that a CEO like Mr. Claypool would see. So it is not surprising that they went to that area. And this has happened before. In some cases politically, they've withdrawn from their assaults on special ed historically. Mr. Vallis began to do this. And it was so problematic for him. And the mayor, at that time, Mayor Daley, who had disability in his family, really caused him to draw back. And he didn't go full forward with many of the things he wanted to do. But special ed is a big expense. And I would just add to what Sarah said about budget cuts. There is a hidden budget cut. And that is, how many of you have children in a school where there are special ed teachers who are not there? That they call them vacant positions. Do you know that you have teachers like that? None of you. You guys are in remarkably good shape.
We got 4 or 5 hands.
Okay, so vacant positions generate money of savings for CPS. And it's actually in the budget. It's called the vacancy factor. And it's millions and millions of dollars. So for every position that they don't fill, they actually cash it out. And it's cashed out against the cost of the substitute versus $100,000 per teacher. And that's how it's figured. And that money is saved. And very shortly, we're going to be going to the State Board of Education, and tomorrow. And one of the things that I am going to say to the State Board is, CPS is trying to save money. Have they sent any of that money back to the state? Did you get any of this money? Did Governor Rauner get any of this money? Did any of this money come back to you? Well, where did it go? Where did all these economies go? And I think the board members there will be intrigued by this. You know, always the danger with this is the anti-Chicago prejudice, you know, because, I mean, the truth is we've had a lot of people that ended up in jail. We've had people that have committed suicide and found in the river for embezzlement. And that is you know, I worked in Springfield quite a bit, and that's a story that's out there. It's always a danger when you open up this Pandora's box. But most of us, and I'll tell you right now, this is the most fascinating coalition I've ever seen in my life. I've never been in a coalition where the Middle Management Principals Association and the union for one of the largest districts in America are on the same side of the special ed issue. Where every major advocacy group for children with disabilities is on the same side. Where Ounce of Prevention Fund, one of the largest organizations for early childhood, is on board on having the state do something with CPS to do their job. They have the responsibility for overseeing special ed. That's in federal law. And we're going to ask that they do that. And we're going to ask that tomorrow, and there's going to be quite a number of people asking that. And we've had a letter, and I don't think this campaign will end tomorrow. I think it's going to go on a while, and it's going to be something that all the family people here need to think about. So.
Thanks, Rod. So I guess we can all see stuff happening that we know is wrong, but the question, Ashley, maybe we could put to you is, what's the difference between just what's wrong and what is illegal? Like, what's illegal about what's happening here? You know, a lot of people it comes down to, can you get a lawyer or not? But can you just talk about the legalities of this situation?
I think that one thing we need to think about when we're talking about the law and the law that exists for special education is that the kind of main ideas behind that law are that parents are part of the IEP team, a full member of the IEP team, and that the IEP team should make the decisions about the IEP. And what you're seeing a little bit with what's going on in CPS, and really it has not started this year, it started a long time ago, but you are seeing it intensified and put into writing a little bit more now, is that IEP teams are being sometimes explicitly vetoed by a person who is in the main district office. And it's hard to say, when does the line cross between being this is questionable from this is blatantly illegal. That would be a very fact-specific analysis. But in general, if you think about, am I as a parent being excluded from the team decisions? Are things being predetermined? Are things being closed off from discussion because someone said there's a policy that doesn't allow us to do that? That could very well be a violation of the law.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there anybody here who's seen that, an IEP team decision that's been vetoed up the chain? Okay, you see this? This is what's happening.
Yes, and we know that sometimes it happens explicitly and sometimes you know about it, and sometimes you don't actually know that that's what happened. You just all of a sudden find out that something was taken out or something was changed, or you're suddenly called back for another meeting and you're kind of confused why. And I think the other question you have to ask yourself is, is it not a conversation that's being had about what is appropriate for this child, right? That is the standard under special education law. What is appropriate for that child to make progress? Not what the district policy is, not what the forms require, not what the district representative says. It's what is the individualized need of that child for them to make progress. So I think in general what you're seeing is that those kind of tenets of IDEA are not being respected as much, sometimes explicitly in writing, with this new document that started last year called the procedural manual, which is what the consultants that Sarah was talking about were in part paid to do. And sometimes just in general when you're sitting in meetings, from the answers that you're hearing back from the team. And I think what's important to realize is that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that sometimes a parent doesn't know about, and the team may be thinking the same thing that you're thinking, but they're being told something from another office. So I think you need to be aware of the dynamics that are going on, and I think the best thing you can do is exactly this. Educate yourself about what's going on in the district. I don't know how much more we'll talk about a little bit, but you should all be aware that there's this document now called a procedural manual. It started last year. There's also 5 standalone documents called procedures or guidelines. Now, I can, and we have, with several other lawyers, gone through these documents and said the ways in which we think they violate the law. But I think it's still important as a parent for you to know that those exist and to look at them, because there's a rule book, and you need to know what the rule book is. And whether or not we agree that those rules and policies that these consultants have created are legal, it empowers you to know what those things say before you walk into that meeting. So I encourage you, they have represented to us that they were going to put these on the Diverse Learners website. They're in the process of revising this yet again. We're now on version number 3 since about a year ago. And
how can it not be public?
Which was one of our major issues. They are now representing that it will be on the Diverse Learners website, but of course I don't know that there's going to be a Spanish translated version. The one document is 100 pages plus. The procedures documents are a little bit shorter. But I think without, obviously having the time to go into everything in there, it's important to know what's in there so that you know what's happening outside of that room before you walk into the room.
Do they have a date when you're going to put it on their Little's website?
No, but the new draft that they come up with has a date of December 2017, so we think they're going to publish it in December 2017. We have asked if they put the current one on the Little's website. Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
So the Brand. Yeah. So it is. Brand knows all this. It is apparently on the website right now, but it's going to change soon. So it's worth making sure that you look at those documents and are aware what they say, because when we're talking about how things are being done outside of the meeting and without the parents' involvement, and even going over the head of the IEP team, it all kind of starts with those policies that they're setting up and they're putting in writing.
Well, so you mentioned the IEP team and the parents, and Rod had just mentioned the Principals Association being on the same page, and I saw that Troy LaRavia has just joined us from the Principals Association as well. And I want to ask Natasha and Megan, our teachers on the team, like, clearly CPS tries to divide us and turn us against each other, get the parents mad at the teachers, get the teachers mad at the principals, and keep everyone from getting mad at them. But could you talk about, like, how can we organize and support each other? As teachers, what can parents do that would support, that get us on the same team instead of against each other? Maybe what can we do to support principals who seem like are caught in the middle of this whole thing? Could you guys just both talk about that a little bit from the school perspective?
I think first and foremost is being transparent with the parents. I unfortunately have had to use my report card pickup conferences for time for my reevaluations. Particularly, for some context, I teach K-3, separate class special education, and a lot of my students have been early identification, and so they're usually up for their reevaluation. Within kindergarten, first grade, the latest would be second grade. And so even a conversation I had to have with a parent yesterday who was denied the ability to get the appropriate label for their son at the end of his preschool year, where the psychologist said, it's not autism, it's just because the child's not being challenged and he's bilingual. And the evaluator wrote that in their report. And that same evaluator had to read an outside evaluation report last year from the outside clinic in which stated that Ms. Carlson had urged the family to get an outside diagnosis and that in fact the child does have autism. And that psychologist had to accept that report. And that was my sweet victory. But the most important thing is being transparent. It's us together, because also that same psychologist had informed me in the assessment planning meeting we had this year that she is going to propose to the parents that it's not autism again. It is Fragile X. And so that is detrimental to the parents because they now have 2 outside diagnoses of autism, but they've been in this process of accepting what it means for their family and, again, working with them to give them that heads up. And the district has clearly said, Liz Keenan herself, the director of special education, said that the district representatives, so the network people, should be having pre-meetings with principals if they're both going to be present at the IEP team table so that they don't disagree. And so essentially we are reversing it, where we're having our own pre-meetings, where we are discussing and clearly evaluating the data and what we believe in collaboration with the related service providers. So there's not, and we're a united front. Second off, with the principals, it's become a little bit more tricky because my administration chose not to pay for a case manager, and instead, the case management duties have been divided among all of us. And so first and foremost, case manager makes those decisions as part of the district representative, but of course the principal that is in charge of the budget also is now sitting at that table determining the expensive services. And I've already seen a trend on the day budgets were released to principals. On the very day I get a phone call from my principal questioning my minutes for students, and particularly my students with higher needs, essentially implying that a placement change would need to be considered. Maybe this isn't the right placement for them, was her exact words. Mind you, she was not case manager yet and had not spent a significant amount of time with these children, these 2 particular children. But she sees how much they impact our school. And also, again, even though CPS claims they uncommingled the budgets, of we know giving a flat rate of $100,000 for special education teachers or $50,000 for SICAs or paraprofessionals, taking into account all of their benefits does not actually fund special education. And so we're already at a school where last year we had to spend almost $300,000 of our general education funds to pay for special education, and this year we had to spend $150,000. And so even in those difficult conversations with my principal, it's always going back to being united and transparent, and also ensuring that it's rooted in the kid. Because deep down, regardless of the pressure that CPS puts on me, on my principal, on all of the other providers in the school, it's what is best for that child regardless of those pressures, which takes a lot of work and trust, but it's working so far.
So I agree with a lot of the stuff that Natasha was saying. I think it's really important to be very direct with parents, and let them know kind of exactly where you stand and exactly what's going on in the class, and to give them as much data and, evidence of how their child is performing, what their child is getting from me in terms of services. And then I think for a lot of my parents, they're not really totally aware of all of their rights. And I know as a new special ed teacher, reading the IEP is very confusing and overwhelming. So these parents who aren't working with, 15 to 30 IEPs in a year, they're not going to have that expertise right away. So I think taking the time to kind of, guide parents through that document and explain to them, these are the sections that show exactly what minutes your child is getting. This is what, and for some kids, I'm teaching 6th through 8th grade, inclusion and separate setting. For those kids, they can go home and tell their parent, yeah, when I was in science class, Ms. Kowalski's not with me anymore, and she, always was last year, and I think that that's in my IEP. I think it's important, too. I have a lot of kids in separate settings, so we will talk about, how to read their own IEP and how to kind of advocate for themselves so that they're aware in some of these settings that these things are going on, and they can go home and say to their parent, in my IEP, I know it says I get this and this and that, and I'm not getting this when I'm in this room or in this place. And then I think it's about kind of empowering parents and showing them that I'm on their side. I want the best for their child. I'm doing as much as I can to provide the best for their child, and we've got to work together to do that. I think my relationship with my principal is somewhat contentious. I'm the union delegate. So that alone causes some strain, I think, on our relationship. I'm also very, I'm pretty firm in what I think my students need, and I will, if he wants to question me, I'll kind of, I'll talk back, essentially. I'm not going to just back down, because he's saying, well, why do all of your students have 300 minutes per week of reading? Well, show me which one is reading above a 3rd grade level, in the 6th through 8th grade. But yeah, he notices these patterns, and he's like, it's a pattern. Why is this going on? And I wish that there were more trust in my expertise and sort of a willingness to hear me out. I feel like a lot of times what he wants to do in these situations is sort of catch me doing something that's, uncalled for or unnecessary. And I understand that it's expensive, and I don't have a problem being questioned. But and I know he's facing a lot of pressure from the network, but it's just this constant. He'll ask me the same question in different words, thinking that he can get a different answer so that we can change the service, and I'm like, it's always the same answer. If you want to tell me that I have to change the service, then you can say those words, and we'll go forward from there, but I have to tell you, in my professional opinion, this is what's true and this is what we need to do. And I think it's important too, for parents to advocate directly to the principal. A lot of my parents will come to me first, and I'm like, you should go to him and ask him some of these questions, because now my principal's the case manager this year too, so I'm like, he should have more expertise on this, or may be able to give you insight that I can't. So trying to encourage them to establish that relationship with the principal or case manager as well as the teacher.
Natasha, you wanted to add one more thing?
I just wanted to add one thing, because I'm actually also the union delegate, and it's separating and compartmentalizing, but I think the most important thing is to not take things personally. Because even with these additional dynamics, and especially the case management thing, I think is going to become a larger issue as the year goes on, where my principal, the only feedback she had given me last year in my evaluation, and I promise this is related, is that I was asked to work on my exasperated breathing and my loud typing and my jump to legal rhetoric in arguments. Well, I have the pleasure of having the old head of all clinicians as my psychologist. And so my interpretation is, it's not I'm jumping to dismiss an argument. What she's saying is illegal. And so even there, where I could have nitpicked with my principal and said, please show me where exasperated breathing and hard typing is in our framework that distinguishes I'm a good teacher or not, but instead it chose to not focus on that, because again, it's going forward in where things are actually the root. And I think, again, to elaborate on parents knowing their rights, I started as a middle school teacher and I never thought I would have had a day where I loved primary. I love primary because I can reinforce or teach the parents exactly what those rights are, no matter who their teacher is, no matter if they're in CPS or anywhere else in the US, because it's under IDEA that regardless of their economic status, regardless of their immigration status, that they are protected by this law.
Maybe Ashley could talk to this too. CPS is implementing a standard that the Supreme Court found to be unjust in a case this year, and that's the Andrew case. The Andrew case said that what is appropriate for disabled children isn't the minimum of progress. The minimum of progress in that measurement of the court was anything above flat line. Anything that was above it was minimum progress, and that was acceptable to a lower court. And our conservative court, our conservative Supreme Court said, no, that is not appropriate. They don't know what appropriate is, but they know that that's not it. Well, I'll tell you, what CPS is implementing is that. That's what they're implementing.
Provide the minimum.
Provide the minimum progress. The minimum. And if it's flatline, and you want to write the child off because they're just too disabled, if you can get away with it, you get away with that too. But I mean, that's my opinion on what we're seeing here.
So I know that a lot of parents deal with this stuff and get our heads explode, and we get very frustrated, and we get a headache, and we don't understand what's going on. We don't know who to trust. And it's one of the big issues. So should we get mad at the teacher? Should we get mad at the principal? We don't know who. And one of the things that doesn't happen enough in special ed is us getting organized as parents at the school level. And I know Parents for Teachers is doing a lot of organizing in that way, trying to get parents in touch with each other at the school level. Raise Your Hand has been a huge resource for parents trying to get organized. And Christine, maybe you could just talk about, like, you know, as a parent at the school, like, how do you start the process both of fighting for your kid, but also of trying to hook up with other parents who are doing the same thing, which I know you've done. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, and hopefully I can keep my voice. I've got the cold that everybody has right now. But, you know, I think it's really challenging as a parent. I've had a little bit of a benefit of, my mom was a special education coordinator when I was a kid growing up. So, you know, the acronyms IEP, ADHD, you know, not so much autism, but a lot of that was familiar to me already. So, and we had the benefit when my kiddo started in kindergarten. We had a wonderful principal. He was diagnosed via CPS having autism, which was fortunate for us. I think now, I question whether or not he would have been diagnosed through CPS. Of course, we get outside diagnoses as well, but it seems like one of the patterns right now is that they're avoiding the ASD diagnosis at all costs. So we, you know, we're fortunate in some ways, and then last year we sort of got stuck in the paraprofessional justification form. And I, you know, was always very vocal about an understanding that my kiddo was challenging, and that it was, we either needed to work together as a team or it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work for the teachers, it wasn't going to work for the administration, and no one was going to be happy. So I sort of elbowed my way in a lot and really found it interesting that I guess it was odd that a parent would be so involved. Some of the teachers and some of the case management and stuff just sort of felt like it was abnormal or atypical. And like I said, starting with that paraprofessional justification form last year, we had sort of in the spring of 2016 been asking for a one-to-one aid, and being a part of the special education task force prior to that, I was able to understand more about what was going on with the delays and denials than even our case management and principal happened to know at the time. So we were able to sort of share some of that information to figure out what was going on and how to move forward. Now, our principal at the time when we did that the fall last year, I was very fortunate to have been connected with an advocate, Terry Smith, and a lot of what we had to do to make it crystal clear that my son required an aid and that I was not going to back down was write letters, was to get a little bit confrontational, and it was really uncomfortable. But I continued to remind, our administration at that time that, it wasn't personal. It was, we were going to get through it, and we together sort of realized that it was CPS. It wasn't the teachers, it wasn't the case management, it wasn't the principals. And at that time, some of our case management too, they were stating things that were stated as statute to them by CPS that I had to make sure that they understood was actually against the law, and it was not statute. So it was challenging, and there were a lot of times when I think that it would have been a little bit easier had we just gone to another school, or had we moved, or had we done any number of things. But I think that through it all, I just continually said, this is our neighborhood school, and my child deserves to go to our neighborhood school, and we're going to figure it out, and we're going to work it out, and you're going to have to communicate with me, and we're going to try, again, to take some of the emotion out of it. And that's very difficult as well. I think part of it goes back to way in the beginning, when my kiddo was in kindergarten, and sort of realizing there's almost like a moment of grief when you realize to a point, okay, so CPS is not just going to do what's right by our kiddos. And I'm going to have to fight 10 times as hard for what he needs and deserves. And, once you sort of get past that stage of grief and realize, like, this is how I'm going to fight to move forward, it is a little bit empowering, and, and it doesn't end. It's continuing to go on. The second part of our fight was once we finally got, the information on how to, and the data to fill out the parent justification form. Parts of it was so much data was involved, and so many check boxes needed to be made, and even the team didn't really know how to use the new software. We were all getting pretty frustrated, so I went straight to the Board of Ed, and I asked Horace Claypool, what's going on, what's happening, what can we do to move things along? And that works, and we went to the media at one point, and that works too. And they do retaliate against you a little bit, but you just make sure that they understand that you're not backing down, and that you know what your kiddos need, and you're going to keep fighting for it. The second part that was really challenging after getting through sort of working with the administrative team, working with our IEP team, and then getting the paraprofessional and getting the things that you need on the IEP, for us was getting the budget to fund the paraprofessional. So we had delays initially that were not necessarily our local school's fault, that were CPS's fault. And then we had even more delays because there was no funding for the paraprofessional. So that was an interesting fight as well, because we had to ask our school's LFC for the funding from the Gen Ed pot to fund a special education position. And that put me in an awkward position as well. But you know what, I just keep going to all the LSC meetings and making sure that all the parents understand that, our school has a lot of diverse needs, and these are a part of them. And if there's any other families that come up the same situation, I make sure that I'm there to explain why those funds are needed and how they help all of our students. And and it's frustrating. So last year, my son's aid was not covered via special education funding, and then this year it wasn't again. So it's a challenge, but I think it's important to always stay cordial. Our school's a little bit different. At some other schools, teachers are really not allowed, special education teachers are simply not allowed to speak out. They are not allowed to give you papers that might help you understand your IEP or be in that meeting. They are retaliated against. Sometimes there are some teachers that will give you a secret code at the, IEP table, but if you don't know what they're doing, or if you don't understand that that's happening, how would you know? We're really trying to work hard to work with the Special Education Task Force and Raise Your Hand. We're looking to do a Chicago Sped Pack. Boston Sped Pack has a really great program, so it's a Chicago Special Education Parent Advisory Council. This would be something that would encourage individual schools and local schools to set up special education PTAs or parent advisory councils like Alcott has, I believe, and really sort of to a point telling our administrators that these are things that we're going to have in our schools. We're not asking anymore. And that would help sort of parents fight as a whole for what the schools need. Another part of that, I did speak with Elizabeth Keenan about this Parent Advisory Council, and there are some benefits when parents talk out. She did cite that IDA funds a position for a district-run sort of parent advisor for special education, and that position has been fulfilled. So there's definitely a lot of times when, as a parent, it's tiring. I think last year it was about 20 hours a week just to keep up with fighting, and we had to fight so much just for the aide position that this year some of the other things that come up that you still, as environments change and as the kiddos change and the requirements change, you still have to go back and forth on, and it's exhausting. And it's really challenging, but keeping a good relationship with the teachers and the administration is really important. And knowing that who we're sort of fighting against is CPS, and that to an extent, their hands are tied. I remember one conversation we had, it was Greg Volan from CPS. He's their resource allotment manager at ODLSS. He has a finance background, no special education background. And we had a phone call that was put on, or it was set up by ODLSS, I can't remember who, and our principals were on it. And it was to tell me why our budget appeal was denied and for the aid, and why there were so many delays. And this conference call, which both my principals were on, was specifically to blame the local school level. And I just didn't even allow it to happen. And I felt bad because my principals never got an opportunity to talk in the entire conference, because I was just so angry and let him know, like, under no situation is this going to fly, and you're the management, and you're sort of who sets these procedures and everything, and if there's an issue, it's going to be with you, not with the local school level. And then at the closing, he was like, well, what do you expect us to do? There's a $215 million shortfall, so a challenge as well. So.
Can I just speak to a tiny bit of that? Troy, who's in the back of the room, wrote a great bullet point in our letter to ISB that we're going to issue tomorrow, and it speaks directly to what was just said. Here's what Troy wrote. CPS officials have lumped special education and general education services into a school-based zero-sum funding competition with one and another. That's exactly what we just heard. That's exactly what we just heard. And the principals are being put in a impossible situation. And that's exactly what we just heard.
Just building off of both of those, we're talking about what's blatantly illegal and what, is edging the line of illegal. One very common example that, we're seeing and at LAF we're scratching the surface, right? There's probably hundreds of more examples of this. Once something like a paraprofessional, an aide, is put into the IEP, under the law, they have 10 days to implement that. But instead, what you see last year, and now again this year, is the school having to appeal their budget and ask for more money to hire the aide. The aide that the IEP team has already decided is necessary. And when the school is eventually, when their appeal is denied, the principal is left with the choice of, do I violate this kid's rights under IDA, or do I take money from somewhere else and pay for the aid that way? And that's where you see this thing where you're taking money, but you're shifting money from general education resources into a special education position, thus pitting parents against each other. Or you're just blatantly not giving the student something that the IEP team has already said they need. So I think this is an example of where the policy, this appeal process that they went through, is showing that even when a parent is able sometimes to get the services in the IEP, and everybody agreed on it, it actually got in there, it's not being implemented as it should be. And I think that's something we're seeing more and more and more starting last school year.
Troy, I don't know if we can ask you to just share your thoughts on this particular moment and how you see where we're at and how this year is different from the past.
I don't know if I can comment on all of that, but
And what we should do now.
Troy, come up.
Troy LaRaviere, previous principal at Blaine, and now the head of the Chicago Principals Association, and a warrior for all of our kids.
so I was not prepared to speak. But I can say this. I spent a lot of time thinking about this because I spent a lot of time hearing about it and thinking about the most precise way to articulate what's happening. And that's where some of that language came from. And other language I think we need to start using. They're not, it's not like there's this pot of money that they're shifting around. We say that principals have to shift money around. Maybe in some ways that's true, but a better and more accurate way to talk about it is that principals have to get rid of services in one area of the school in order to provide services in another. It's not like, because that money was going toward a service, a human being that was skilled, that was providing a service in the general education arena. And now that person who was providing a service to children has been taken from those children so that another person can be hired to provide services in another area of school operations. And the interesting thing is, any way you go with it, the special education kid loses, because special education kids spend the majority of their time in the general education environment. And so if you take away a first grade teacher, for example, and then overcrowd the first grade classrooms as a result, those special education kids who may have gotten an aid as a result of the fact that that teacher was let go, now has to spend his time in an overcrowded first grade classroom. And so all of the kids, including special education kids, lose out with this model. And so that was the thing I was thinking about as you guys were talking about this.
Can I ask you a question? I'm just curious how drastic, I've been in the system on and off since '86. Worry about when you take that comment to the state is, my impression is they're not saving the money. It's that they never had enough money to begin with, which is the reason they're playing this game. It's not like they're putting it in their coffers or doing something elaborate. I don't think personally that once they went to student-based funding, there was ever enough money again and made it much worse than what it was to begin with.
It's true. I mean, it's true, but some of that money went to interest.
Yes,
Okay,
well,
it went to banks.
Right.
And that's something that Troy and a lot of us have talked about for a long time.
I didn't realize that's what you meant by
yeah, I mean, that when we say, you know, are you getting any of this money back? Well, no, state isn't. It's going to the banks. I mean, right now.
Let me say this too. We have to stop using the euphemisms. Budgets have always been student-based. Always. Before the change, they would give you a certain number of staff based on the number of students you had. And so the number of staff you got was based on your students. And so if you have 100 kids or 500 kids, you need, I don't know, 30 staff members. And you got 30 positions that you could then fill with whomever you found to fill them. But it was always based on students. What they changed when they started actually calling it student-based as a euphemism, what they changed was, we're not going to give you those positions anymore. We're just going to give you a pot of money that won't cover as many positions as we used to give you. And so that requires the principal then to cut positions because the amount of money that's given per student does not equal what we used to get in staff per student. So it's always been per student. So it's not student-based budgeting, it's sacrifice-based budgeting. It's sabotage-based budgeting. That's what it is. And in terms of sort of this big picture, in terms of, right, this stuff's been going on for a while. These are the first couple of years it's hit, but they started the sacrifice-based budgeting in the general education arena back in 2013. Now they're extending sacrifice-based budgeting to special education. But they've been doing it for quite a while. We have in control of our school system an administration that is committed to funneling as much of the resources for that system as humanly possible into the private sector. And you can't funnel it to the private sector if you're still paying for public services with it. You have to stop spending it on us in order to spend it on them. And it will get worse and worse and worse as long as we let it.
So we've been talking at you guys, I know a lot up here. Yes, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. So I think what we're going to do now, what we want to do, obviously, it's not a matter of get the right information and go get your services. It's a matter of we have to fight. We have to organize and fight because this is not going to change it unless we do. We would love now to hear from you guys. If each of us stands up and tells our personal story of our battle, then of course we'll be here until Christmas. And we can't do that tonight. So I'm going to ask if people would take about 2 minutes. I'm not going to be like the Board of Ed and make it go and drag you off for 2 minutes. But let's just try to be respectful of each other's time. But if you guys could please share out questions that you have for this group up here, or for Sarah or for Troy, and or situations that you're in that you think we might be able to work together and organize around. So I saw 1, 2 hands to start out with. So do you want to start us off? Do we need this, or maybe you guys could just yell out nice and loud?
Is it helpful for the video to use the mic?
Probably.
Then come step on up.
If you don't mind.
And could other people that want to ask a question, please get ready and come on up here and please just share either your question for the panel or your comments on your situation that we could all learn from.
So my name is Anne. I have a 6-year-old with autism who's less than 1% verbal, and our struggle has been getting him the proper services in the school, and we had to lobby to get like the golden amount of 60 minutes, which is ridiculous. The fact that like we were told that we hit the lottery because he got 60 minutes is embarrassing. So my question is how do we collectively fight back against this? As parents, we can individually have like, you know, due process meetings over and over and over and over again, and we know what's best for our kids, but how do we get a depository of this went wrong, this is illegal, this is illegal? What type of like civil action can we take as a collective group as opposed to like, you know, hundreds of thousands of battles? So.
Thank you.
So I think and please correct me if my understanding is incorrect, but 60 minutes of speech you were saying, of like related service provider, and I think that very much is a struggle because it is where 15 minutes per week seems like the norm for everything. And we know just even logistically, 15 minutes of walking up the stairs, walking back down the stairs, you know, taking them there to the room. And so one of the things where Claypool has kind of significantly dug himself a nice little grave that we can make him wear, not morbid, but
not literally,
but where
we get you.
Claiming that the procedural manual was based upon feedback from this task force. And so one of the things is the hope of, if there ever is a procedural manual that stays, that it is made by feedback from us. And I think a really key area that needs to be focused on is how minutes are given in the related service providers. Now, it's always, I am a big, strong supporter of you cannot have a blanket statement, things of that nature, but of acknowledging that related service providers needs to have something more consistent, because even it becomes a fight at the table where a teacher is saying 15 minutes of social work a week or 15 minutes of speech is not enough time to meet that goal. And you don't want to be arguing with your union brother or sister or your colleague or things of that nature. And so I think really of getting something, that is where a procedural manual or guidelines could be beneficial. That's more.
Well, we can fight that.
Yeah.
My question is,
Should give it to Christine, I think.
So we're going to the Illinois State Board tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
All of us.
Anybody want to get on the bus?
Troy, myself, the lawyers, the Chicago Teachers Union. We're all for once, working together. And we're going to stay together. And believe me, they're trying to divide us.
That's right.
We're getting phone calls, we're getting deals, we're getting all kinds of offers to us. Right down the block.
Don't take it.
Okay? They want us to make a deal that is no deal. And we're going to try to keep doing this. But you know what? It's not going to be easy. We're going to have to go to Springfield. We're going to have to go to the city council. We're going to have to keep doing it. And we shouldn't have any illusion if Rahm Emanuel gets rid of Forrest Claypool and changes the chief,
right,
that it all gets better.
It's not
You know? But this is the only way forward for us all. And for generations.
Christine wants to speak to this one, and then we'll go to our next question right here.
Yeah, so I think that it's really important for parents to speak up. You know, it's wonderful to have raise your hand, to have, teachers speaking up in administration, but the largest voice that can speak is ours. And it's important to do things like go to the Board of Education meetings. You know, there's a lot of times, there's 4 or 5 of us that are the same 5 parents that come in and come through, and they start to stop listening to us. It's important to talk to the press as well, and if you have a concern, to reach out, to raise your hand, or reach out to, in our toolkit, we have a lot of resources. If you're up for it and our kiddos need us to be, get loud and get louder. And when you hear something like you've got that golden ticket, you make sure that you remind whomever told you that you're still fighting for the rest of what your child needs. And that you change that narrative and don't allow it. And, and I think that the most important thing is to just stay loud and to stay consistent and make sure that they understand that we all are working together and we collectively know our rights. You know, when I spoke with Ms. Keenan at the time, I told her about our Parent Advisory Council that was thousands strong. Well, it was me. And it has since grown and will continue to grow. And I think that, one of the things she said was, well, we want to really make sure we feel like parents feel like their voices are not heard. And I said, well, no, I don't need to just feel like you heard me.
Right.
I need you to hear me, and we need a place at that table. You've got consultants upstairs, you've got, and I'll try not to name names, but there's a person writing your procedural manual. Well, why are we not at that table as a part of that group? And it's really important, in the WBEZ article, for example, they cited a special education task force of parents. And I can't find one parent that was actually on that task force that helped write the manual. So it's really important, again, reach out. We can get contact information after this, and it's just keep doing what you're already doing, and don't ever back down.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's great I get to follow up behind her. Who am I? My name is Misty Campbell. My son is 20 years old. He has cerebral palsy with a seizure disorder. We are no longer in the school system. I'll apply for that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And being in this room, I've been having all kind of flashbacks.
My son's 22, so I know exactly.
But I know what it's like to be in an IEP room, and they're like, oh, well, your son sleeps through OT. And I'm like, well, I told you he gets the seizure medicine at this time, so if you schedule it at 11, he's going to be asleep. You know what I mean? I never went into an IEP meeting without an advocate, ever. When Miss Campbell came in the room, they knew I meant business. And if you have a child that's really involved, you're not just dealing with the educational, you're dealing with the doctors, the therapy. So what I like to teach parents and tell parents, you are head of a multidisciplinary team. If everybody quits today, you still have to advocate for your child. If the doctor quits, if the principals quit, if the teachers quit. Like she's saying, the parents are the spearheaders. So I brought some pamphlets. I do advocacy work just to let parents know, so you're not sitting in an IEP meeting like, oh, what's going on? My uncle retired from special ed. He's sat in many meetings where they're like, we're going to put your child on the moon. And they're like, oh, okay, that's fine. No, you need to be informed. You need to be educated. We have the attorney here. I knew all the laws. Back in our day, it was called the Blue Book. I don't know if they still call it the Blue Book, but I knew the Blue Book. I knew the laws. I knew the rules. I knew my rights. And so I'm just here to support other parents to make sure that they can get the proper education that their kids deserve. Thank you.
Another warrior.
Hello. I'm Terry Smith. I'm the parent of a special needs fourth grader in CPS, and I'm also a special ed advocate. And to date, I've been to, I counted this morning, between 32 and 36 IEP meetings. And what I want to say to your question about how can parents organize, I think it's really important to write to your schools or go to your school's PTA and ask to form a special ed committee or a special ed, whatever you want to call it, because we don't even know who each other are. I'm a vocal special ed advocate and parent, and I know 2 other special ed parents in my kid's school. We tried to form a special ed roundtable just to talk about the issues, and ODLSS called our principal when they got word of it and said, these parents could not meet without an ODLSS representative present. And my principal actually
They're scared of us. They're scared of us, people.
called me into her office
They're scared of us.
around this. I also want to say that if you feel that your kids, your school's not properly funded to give your kids the services that they need, compel your principal to ask for, what do you call that? An appeal, to appeal the budget. And when they don't get the appeal approved, ask them what CPS told them. I know in some cases, 2 that I know of directly, CPS has said, well, at the beginning of the year, before the 10 days, you hired an art teacher. Now you're asking us for money that we held back before, so you have to fire that person. We want you to fire that person in order to fund this, even though they held back money that they said they would release if you had a need after the 10 days. So you should definitely find out what the reason is and talk to other parents about it. The third thing that I want to say, if it is the third, is that, and maybe Natasha and Megan can speak to this, is oftentimes service providers and teachers are misinformed in their in-service trainings and in professional development.
That's the truth.
So when I first started out this, I used to get really mad and indignant. Why are you saying these untrue things and proliferating illegal information? But I've since come to find that in many cases, CPS has designed system-wide trainings to cause these people to be their henchmen to pass on this information to deny services. So definitely give them the benefit of the doubt and think of yourself as a person to educate them. If you have to pull out the IDEA and say, no, this is your responsibility, this is what it says, often they're surprised and remorseful, like, oh my gosh. So there's that, and I think that was the last thing that I wanted to say about all of that. Also, if you have questions or you're unsure, raise your hand, and one of us will at least try to explain to you how the law pertains in your situation. And if we can provide advocacy services, on a volunteer basis, we most certainly will. And that's it. My main message is, don't blame the service providers. Don't blame the teachers. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Think of them as their ally. And if it helps you, think of yourselves as having a common enemy. And it makes the process go a lot better.
I just want to speak something on that. Thanks, Terry. That where the special ed parents are united in numbers, that's really hard to do, like we've been saying. Where we are united in numbers, it's a very powerful voice. And so I think that's what we have to figure out, is everybody in this room figure out how can we organize among ourselves. At the school level, maybe across schools, like we were talking about. I know at Jackie Vaughn High School, where every kid has an IEP, we had a full gymnasium when they tried to take away half of our aides. They tried to take away half of the aides to the kids in our school. And we had a full gymnasium, and we brought, who was the one after Marquet, but before Bacillari?
Kate Foley.
Foley, thank you. We brought her into the gym, and she was surrounded by kids and parents, and she was not comfortable in that situation. And, we fought together, and we supported our principal, we supported our teachers. We were able to get those positions back, except for the vacant ones that they still took away. But I'm not saying that it's easy, and it's harder now than it was a couple years ago. But we have got to organize. We have to have numbers of people together. And we can't think that it's just get your advocate, argue the law, find out what to do, and it'll all be fine. They're trying to wring it dry. Yes, please.
I just wanted to add to, talking about bringing an advocate with you to a meeting. There are not enough free attorneys out there, obviously, and not everyone can afford an attorney. So having an advocate who comes with you to a meeting is a great idea, but there's no such thing as an official advocate. An advocate can bring another parent who's been through this a little bit longer than you and who you want to come to the meeting. You have a right to bring whoever you want to an IP meeting. So if you know a parent who's been through it a little bit longer and you want to bring them with you to kind of be a gut check with you at that meeting, you can do that. And I think that's when we talk about parents organizing within schools, that can be a powerful tool, because talking about the 60 minutes, there are some parents who might be told by a school team, perhaps because the school team has been told this erroneously by the people training them, that 30 minutes or 15 minutes is standard and that's what the law requires. And the parent may just say, oh, well, okay, I accept that because you're telling me that's the truth. And they need someone to say, no, actually, I found out that's not the truth. It's not, there is no limit. There is no max. It's what's appropriate for that child. But they might need to hear that from someone else who's figured that out. So I think that can be a really effective way to educate people about their rights. And I think that it needs to come from each other and from people who've been there before, who are figuring these things out. And the one other point I wanted to make is, earlier I talked about looking at this procedural manual that's online. I want to be very clear. The procedural manual is not the law. It is their document that they created for their own reasons. You need to know what it says in order to assist you to figure out what's going on when I walk in this door. But it is not the law. Do not take what it says as the law. The law is very separate from that. So please make sure that when you're educating yourself that you're sure what you're looking at. And like people were saying, sometimes the team will be misinformed. I've been at lots of IEP meetings where the team says, oh, well, we can't do that, or we're not allowed to do this. And I say, that is not the law. That is CPS policy. And not every special education teacher or school psychologist knows the law as well as these ones do. And they honestly think they are telling you the law, and they don't realize that that's not actually true. So knowing the difference between those two things is really important.
Can I say one more thing? I'm sorry. You are allowed to bring whomever you want to the meeting. However, CPS is not allowed to bring whoever they want to the meeting. Of the 30-odd meetings that I've been to, not all were for separate people, but of them, on 3 occasions, I've walked into the room and there's an attorney, there's a CPS attorney in the room. And if a parent does not know that the CPS has no right to bring an attorney, or really anybody who you haven't, first of all, been previously notified is going to be there, and second of all, doesn't have a function, you can ask that person to leave the room. And certainly if they show up with an attorney, eject that person right away. Even if you come with an attorney to an IEP meeting, they cannot bring an attorney. And I just wanted to,
I wanted to follow up on that as well. One of the things that we're trying to do as parents and a parent group is the district representative position is, we're sort of unclear about what it is. So I was in a lot of IEP meetings where our team was, arguing or trying to fight for this need for a paraprofessional, and safety was a concern. It should have been a one and done. And the district representative was there to kind of say, well, was he in danger during the 10 minutes of lunch? Was he then in danger again during the class after that? Was he then in, and you had to hit all these data points. So we had to fight against this district rep and say, I remember saying, are you saying he needs to leave the school and get hurt before you will justify the aid? So this year, with success, our first IEP meeting, I asked that the district rep not come. And she did not come. So there's a lot of ways, and then anybody just in general as well, knowing this appeals process. So right now there are still, we are waiting for the Freedom of Information Act, but tens and maybe hundreds of special education teachers and paraprofessionals, SICAs, waiting in appeal. So these IEPs have been approved for students and they are sitting there waiting. CPS is not being transparent on the situation with them or the status of them, and they will sit there and delay and delay and deny. Some of the principals' appeals are getting pushed back as expired, and you have to appeal again. So if there is anyone who feels that their student may or may not need a shared aid, or if you're thinking about it, or if you're thinking about asking it for it in the spring, don't wait. Start the process now and encourage your school. And if anybody, again, hears that, well, we don't have the resources, or we can give you what we have based on the resources that we have in school, don't accept it and keep fighting.
Just real quick, because we got to.
Okay, I just want to clarify one thing. The law requires that there be someone who has district level authority to commit to resources at every meeting. But typically that role is fulfilled by what is typically called in CPS the case manager, which, as we've heard, has been different people. Sometimes it's a special ed teacher, now sometimes it's a principal. There has to be someone in that meeting who can commit to resources. Sometimes you will hear them say, oh, we don't have our capital D, capital R district representative here, so we can't give you that. That should not happen.
No, that should not.
The district representative is a job title that CPS has now given to a group of people. They used to be called SSAs or DLSLs. The name changes every year.
Every year.
You can guess why that is. They now are called district representatives, capital D, capital R. So if that person shows up, say, are you the district representative for this school among, they do about 12 different schools that they're all the DR for, and they float around. That means that person works for the main office. And they're coming to that school for a reason.
Yeah. And they don't belong there.
And it might be because there's something going on in your meeting that you're asking for something big, like an aid.
And they're putting the squeeze on your principal to not give it to you.
So just understand, though, there might be times when the person who signs the sign-in form, it says, district representative. That just means that they are the lowercase d-r person with authority for purposes of that meeting. It doesn't mean necessarily they're the person who works for the district. So that's something to clarify when you walk into a meeting. Who are you? And do you work just at this school? Are you the case manager? Or are you over a bunch of schools? Are you a capital D, capital R?
And they'll keep changing it so we can't understand. You know that's going to happen, so we have to be organized. We want to do 3 more things before we leave tonight. We won't possibly be able to do everything. We have one more person that's going to speak. I'm sorry, because I know there's a couple other people as well. If you both can speak just briefly, and then we're going to share, Jen Jones is going to share the results of the survey that Raise Your Hand has done about what's happening this year, just to try to help us understand what's going on out there. And then I think Mary's going to help us go talk about action steps. Where do we go from here? Because we clearly need to be organized. So could each of you take a little moment to share your thoughts, and then we'll.
So I guess my question, what I'm hearing is that we need to organize around, like, what is our fight? What is it that we need? What is it that we need to, like, collectively push back on? And so when we're thinking about school closures and our students and things outside of special ed, what we've been thinking as far as the CTU is concerned is obviously educating parents on what student-based budgeting is and how to fight back on that. What we want to ask on that end, and we've been thinking around, is what are those positions that have to be guaranteed within our budget outside of just principal, assistant principal, and counselor, because all other positions are optional. So like that, our fight there is guaranteed positions outside of those dollars, right? This sabotage, sacrifice budget. What I'm thinking in terms of special ed is concerned, I'm a new teacher to special ed. I was teaching for 7 years. This is my 7th year teaching, 3rd year in special ed, and I don't go to refresher courses for special ed that are outside of CPS. Is there any money or any way that we can organize around something in IDEA language that says we can push for an outside CPS person to be the district level rep that is actually looking out for the best interest of the child and not the best interest of CPS? Or can we figure out how to organize around getting that position?
Can we get some lightning round answers to that one?
Why not push to take over the district?
Yes, or that.
Why not ISBE appoint them? I mean, I used to be a monitor for Chicago Public Schools. I was the dictator, with the judge. And we had subpoena power, and that's gone. I mean, why aren't we back in this situation? The district is just as bad as it was when I was a monitor under federal authority. So, I mean, I think we need to think about a bigger picture here than the network. I mean, this is a district that lost $180 million in derivatives that just paid those in a bond offering. And where's the outrage? Where's the outrage? That would cover all of our problems here for a couple of years. I mean, we've got big problems here with this district, and we need to get in their face at big time. And this State Board of Education has this legal responsibility to do this, and the city government has a legal responsibility to do this. And we need to get into the politician space, and we need to get real here, because...
Answer to that one more question. You want to ask us one more, yeah?
It's not a question, well, it is a question, but because I think there is a solution, but I don't know how practical it is. The Shriver Center had gotten together with a law firm, Goldberg Cohn, when Medicaid for children wasn't being funded correctly, and they won. And the state had to come up with the money. And especially with the fact that now everybody who's in charge wants to take funding and give it to the private sector. But since IDEA is a federal law, I want to know the feasibility of actually having a class action lawsuit that hits the city, the state, and the federal government, because it's all of their jobs to find the money, and the money shouldn't have anything to do with the rest of the school.
And it can't be one kid's case, it's all of us.
That's what I'm saying. I think it has to be a class action lawsuit and hit all of them. And that funding needs to be separate from the regular general money. That was it.
So thank you for that.
And can we have the lawyer?
The Shriver Center is on that, on our meeting tomorrow for ISBE. The problem with the class action lawsuit, and I'm not saying it's not possible, is the time. In the Corey H. case, the lawyers spent 2 years before they got to the courtroom. Okay? Their legal fees were many, many millions. If they had lost, that money had to be eaten by somebody. And it was going to be Northwestern University and Designs for Change. And they both, Designs for Change would have been bankrupt if they lost. So this is a high stakes deal.
Right, but there are a lot of law firms that lawyers need to do pro bono work.
Yeah, but it's not free.
It is.
Troy, you want to speak to it?
That's a negative.
We're actually exploring that.
Thank
the
you.
Schools Association has convened several nonprofit legal organizations, one law firm, and we're on our third convening to look at the possibility of legal action against the district. And again, they've said exactly what you said, like, this is a long-term strategy. There's not going to be any kind of immediate relief out of it, but they feel like it's worth pursuing. So just want to let you guys know.
Give you one strategy a moment, while that's working, we're not standing still.
Well, I'll just back up what Troy said, but that's a conversation that is being had. I think I would say that.
And parents actually need to go to share their story with people, because right now it's, like I said, the same 7 parents who, and you have to actually tell someone what's going on, and you, I don't know.
I mean, where do we go to tell
You
them?
can tell, raise your hand, or
Dr. Keenan said she does not like parents talking at the board. I think it's starting to make
You
her feel like
email
she's
us
looking
like
bad,
a lot
and so
of
I think that would be a great place to go, December 6th, because the board is unelected and they combine both November and December meetings, and so I think that's a great place to start. But also thinking about class action. I know I started teaching with Corey H, and sorry to say this, but our kids are like, we also cannot just wait for the lawsuit route, even though I know that's all CPS cares about in the long run. And I've advocated for lawyers to be present at things like tomorrow or speaking, because that's what scares them more. But of knowing our kids are suffering by the thousands every day.
So we're going to get organized, right? Everybody, like, let's work with the organizations that we have. Let's form new ones. Raise your hand is easy to find. Let's get people out in numbers. So kind of getting back to where Sarah started us off at the beginning. Jen, do you want to share with us what we've learned from our survey about what's happening this year?
Sorry, Jen.
Can I say one thing real quick? Just for, I'm going to say this as a lawyer. Litigation is not the end-all be-all solution. So whether that conversation's happening, that doesn't take away anything else that's been said today or talked about. That's all.
Yes.
But can I just say, as somebody in due process right now, who has hearing dates coming up, CPS is scared of nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
That's right.
So you could say lawyers, you could say best lawyer, you could say whatever. They're not scared. They're scared of losing when it comes down to when you get close to it. But they're not scared until you push hard. So there's nothing that's going to get them scared to give you what you need until you go that route. And it, like you said, it's not going to just be one person, individual case after individual case that's going to do it. It's going to have to take a big one. So I push back on anybody that says, oh, class action isn't going to do it, because that's all that's going to do it. I'll tell you right now, living in my house.
I'm saying it's one. I'm not saying it won't do it.
Well, it's the big one in the toolbox. We can start punching the giant in the knees, but it's going to take a knockout blow.
All right, let's get to Jen.
So you guys, let's go ahead. So Jen, tell us what we know, what's happening now, and then Mary's going to tell us how we're going to move forward.
Okay, so I think a really important point is that as a special ed parent, sometimes you feel like you may be the only one in your school who's experiencing these things. And so we've been asking you to respond to our special ed survey, because I know what's happening in my school, my neighborhood, with my friends. But to get a bigger picture of what's happening across CPS, this year we had double the number of respondents to our survey, which was great. So we have about 150 families coming forward and identifying issues and challenges that they're having with CPS special ed. I'll just get into some of the things that I saw. Overwhelmingly, parents are still having a difficult time getting changes to their children's services and with service compliance. So it is still happening. We have parents telling us this. Last year we saw issues with special ed instruction overall, so that meant push-in minutes and the pull-out minutes. This year what was interesting is that there's a shift. And so parents are having a harder time getting compliance with those push-in minutes, which means that our kids are not benefiting from the least restrictive environment. Similar to last year, families are noting, this para-SECA non-compliance. It's still a predominant issue. This year we asked you about, do you think that the people who are supporting your children are trained to be in this position? Based on the feedback that we received, we're hearing that oftentimes they are not.
So what does that mean? Our school is assigning unqualified personnel due to budget restraints. In our school, I know that there are recess monitors covering for SECA positions. That's happening. We need to let that be known. Another area we explored this year, and this is something that is so important to make sure that you understand, are parents attending assessment planning meetings. So this is an assessment planning meeting, if you're not familiar, is when the IEP team discusses and identifies the assessments they will use to determine if your child is eligible for services. Of our respondents, so 150 families we heard from, almost 40% did not attend the assessment planning meeting. So what that means is parents are not being given a voice in this critical step in their children's education plan. The IEP team, which they're supposed to be a part of, isn't including them in deciding how they're going to assess their child. So through your individual comments, we learned about more gaps in special education. Children who need supports but aren't getting them because they're performing academically just fine. A lack of quality services for specific learning disabilities like dyslexia, as well as slow or no communication about service compliance. So we have parents asking, is my kid getting these minutes? And they don't even hear back from the school. You know, and we don't know why, but it could be because they don't know how to respond. And they're not collecting the data. Lastly, we heard that sometimes services are being focused on behavior without addressing academic needs. So they're just trying to fix the immediate problem, and they're not, like you said, they're just doing that minimum for the kids' education. So the results, I mean, they're not surprising to us, but it does point to this continued lack of compliance, and we know that our kids aren't getting the services they need. So, you know, that's why we came together tonight, and that's why we have to work together.
Thank you. So Mary, do you want to take us to the next step? How can we move towards action?
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here, because this is kind of step one in taking action. And I acknowledge you all for making the time to join us for this conversation, because it's these kind of conversations that can make a difference in the long term on an individual basis and collectively. More importantly, collectively. Or as importantly. Some of the things that we've covered already that you can do, action steps you can take, are speaking at the Board of Education, speaking at the state hearing that's going to happen tomorrow at 9 a.m. So if you have a compelling story about what your child is experiencing in CPS, the media is interested in hearing about our kids who are not getting what they need. Now, it is a compelling story.
And we have Sarah Karp's phone number now.
And we have Sarah Karp's phone number. So really take those kind of opportunities. Go to Raise Your Hand's website and sign up to be on our email blast list. Ask to be included on our special ed advocates and people who are interested in special ed issues Facebook page for Raise Your Hand. Get educated. There are organizations that offer, like Family Resource Center on Disabilities offers free Know Your Rights workshops every week, and you can even do them online. Really great information that's available for free. You just have to kind of reach out, and it's all on our special ed toolkit that has been just updated on the Raise Your Hand website. Specifically, what you can do right now is call Alderman Brookin's office and ask him to encourage him to hold an education committee hearing in the city council and demand that he have Forrest Claypool, Elizabeth Keenan, and Janice Jackson explain this whole procedural manual thing and the $14 million that they paid to accounting cronies to develop this slash and burn or eat away program for special ed. ask your state reps to write Mayor Emanuel a letter and demanding that he take steps to ensure that CPS follow the federal law. Really, get out there and talk to your elected representatives. They pay attention. And you have no idea how powerful you are in advocating for your kids. Your heart is in there, it comes through, and it makes a difference. So feel empowered, connect with other people, get in, like Terry said, start with your local school and get together with other parents of kids with special needs. Ask them to start a special ed committee with the LSC or the PTA, or do it on a neighborhood basis. Meet in the library, meet at a Starbucks, anything. Start a Facebook page for your area and get together with other people, other parents. It makes a difference. You'll get the support you need, and you can help to change the system. I think that's it. All right.
So I think what we want to do now is the formal whole room discussion, probably we should break up. People can pair up into small groups. We have a great need to get organized. We need to get organized, you guys. We need to have an elected representative school board for the city of Chicago. Until we get that one, we'll be knocking our heads against the wall. So I think, Wendy, if that sounds right to you, well, let's just let people break into groups, do some talking about what you're going to do for next steps. Please engage with all of us up here if you want to do some strategizing about how you see we move forward from here. We don't pretend to have all the answers, but there's a lot of people not in this room. There's a lot of kids not getting services.
Did anyone mention to sign the letter to ditch the manual?
Could you say it into the microphone?
Yes, so Raise Your Hand has a letter on the website asking Mayor Emanuel to fire Forrest Claypool. Immediate next steps. So please sign on to that.
And get rid of the manual.
And to get rid of the manual. To the illegal portions of the manual.
Get rid of the man and the manual.
But we have to be out of here in 10 minutes. So
We have to be out of here in 10 minutes?
I feel people maybe are ready to go home.
Okay, so we're going to break up. Please talk in groups for the next 10 minutes about what your next steps are going to be, and we're going to be cleaning up and getting ready to check out. So thanks a lot, you guys.
Thanks for tuning in. Good night.